This week, Jordan will be piloting Ranar the Ever-Watchful, an exile-based value deck that wants to play with the new Foretell cards as well as with other exile-based control pieces. His opening hand consisted of a mixed direction, a flicker wisp, an amphibian mutineer, an island, plains, outercar waste, and an ancient tomb. Ryan will be piloting Yisan the Wanderer Bard, which is a mono-green combo stacks deck loosely based on Legacy Elves. His opening hand consists of 2 Snow-Covered Forest, a Dryad Arbor, a Seedborn Muse, Sphere of Resistance, a Caustic Caterpillar, and a Wild Growth. Nash will be piloting Sky Shark and Brallin. This is a wheel-based value deck that seeks to amass value whenever a player draws or discards. His opening hand consists of a Plains, a Fiery Islet, a Talisman of Creativity, a Talisman of Conviction, a Whirlwind of Thought, a Consecrated Sphinx, and an Expropriate. Ron will be piloting Animar, Soul of Elements. This is a creature-based combo deck seeking to win through effects like Food Chain or Idle Combo or Cloudstone Curia to infinitely cast creatures or amass an infinitely large ballista. His opening hand consists of Thran Quarry, Gaia's Cradle, Breeding Pool, Forest, Windswept Heath, Finhorn Elves, Force of Vigor. Jordan won the dice roll and will be starting things off with a Tingle land into play tapped. On Ryan's turn, he plays a Snow-Covered Forest and then enchants it with Wild Growth. Nash then plays a Jeskai Triumph as his land for turn and passes. Ron plays a Windswept Heath as his land for turn, cracks it, getting a Taiga. Then he uses this mana to cast his Birds of Paradise. Back around to Jordan's turn, he plays an island for turn and passes. On Ryan's turn, he plays another Snow-Covered Forest and uses all 3 of his mana to cast Yisan the Wanderer Bard. On Nash's turn, Nash plays a Plains and uses both his mana to cast a Talisman of Creativity. Ron then shocks in a Breeding Pool as his land for turn and uses all 3 of his mana to cast Animar, Soul of Elements. Jordan starts his turn off by playing an Ancient Tomb, which he then taps along with his other 2 lands for an Amphibian Mutineer. After it resolves, he targets Yisan with the ETB trigger, exiling him and giving Ryan a 4/3 Salamander. On Ryan's turn, he plays a Snow-Covered Forest and casts a Kyrian Ranger. He then moves to combat and swings with the 4/3 Salamander at Nash, who does not block and takes 4 damage. Nash then plays a Fiery Islet for turn, and taps out to play a Whirlwind of Thought. On Ron's turn, he plays a Gaia's Cradle as his land for turn, then casts a Finhorn Elves, causing a trigger on Animar. He then pays 3 to cast Prowling Serpaport, triggering Animar for a second time. Jordan plays and cracks a Flooded Strand as his land for turn, getting a Plains into play. He then taps out to play Ranar the Ever-Watchful. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with the Amphibian Mutineer for 3 damage. On Ryan's turn, he taps out, floating 4 green mana, activates his Kyrian Ranger ability, and then plays the land he returned to pay the cost, tapping it for a 5th mana, allowing him to cast Yisan for the 2nd time. He then moves to combat and attacks Nash with a 4/3 Salamander. On Nash's turn, he taps out for a Supreme Verdict, triggering his Whirlwind of Thought. Ron draws and passes. Yikes. On Jordan's turn, he casts a Samurai of the Pale Curtain. He then plays Swiftfoot Boots, and then equips them to the Samurai. On Ryan's turn, he plays a Snow-Covered Forest, and taps for 4 in order to cast both Null Rod and Sphere of Resistance. Then on Nash's turn, he plays a Talisman of Conviction, triggering his Whirlwind of Thought. Ron then plays a Forest for turn, and passes. Jordan plays a Painland, and then taps out to play Ranar the Ever-Watchful. He then attacks Ryan for 2. Ryan plays a Misty Rainforest as his land for turn. He then plays Survival of the Fittest. Nash draws and then passes. Ron plays an island for turn and taps out for a Slither Muse. Jordan then plays a Mistgate Pathway as his land for turn. He then casts his Drogskull Captains, then he swings with the team, dealing 5 damage to Ryan. At the end of turn, Ryan cracks his fetch and gets a Snow-Covered Forest, triggering Ranar to make a Spirit. Ryan then uses his Survival of the Fittest, causing Ranar to make another Spirit, and he reveals Karametra's Acolyte. On Ryan's turn, he plays the Acolyte he tutored for, and plays a Dried Arbor as his land for turn. On Ash's turn, he casts a Blast Mist Act, wiping the board and triggering his Whirlwind of Thought. On Ron's turn, he taps 4 lands and casts a Wood Elves. Then he plays an Elvish Mystic. Jordan draws and passes. Ryan starts his turn off with a Wooded Foothills, cracking it for a Snow-Covered Forest. He then casts a Carpet of Flowers. He moves to second main phase, and using all his mana, casts Yisan again. Nash opens his turn with a Brainstorm, triggering the Whirlwind of Thought. He then follows this up with Spire of Industry, and casts his Soul Ring, getting another trigger on the Whirlwind of Thought. Ron plays a Volcanic Island for turn. He then plays his Animar Soul of Elements, and an Eternal Witness, getting Prowling Sword Report back from his graveyard. On Jordan's turn, he encores the Amphibian Mutineer, all 3 ETB. He picks Yisan as 1 target, Animar as another, and his own Spirit Token as the 3rd. He then attacks each player with a copy of Amphibian Mutineer, dealing 3 to each. On Ryan's turn, he taps out and uses the Carpet of Flower mana generated on his first main phase to cast Yisan the Wanderer Bard again. Nash plays Adakar Wastes. Nash then casts a Verity Circle, triggering his Whirlwind of Thought. On Ron's turn, he casts his Force of Vigor, targeting Whirlwind of Thought and Verity Circle. He then casts Survival of the Fittest. He follows it up with an Arid Mesa for turn. On Jordan's turn, he casts a Leyline of Anticipation, and follows it up with a Soul Ring. On Ryan's turn, he casts a Seedborn Muse, and then follows it up with an Elvish Mystic. He plays a Cavern of Souls for a turn, naming elves, and then versus Yisan, and putting a Finhorn Elves into play. Nash plays an Azorius Signet, and on end of turn, Ryan versus with Yisan and gets a Priest of Titania. On Ron's turn, he plays a Command Tower, and then casts Animar Soul of Elements. Then he uses his Survival to get a Gilded Drake, and casts it, targeting Yisan. Ryan then versus with Yisan to get a Reclamation Sage, destroying Survival. The Drake ETB trigger then resolves. Ron tutors and gets a Steam Vents. On Jordan's turn, he plays Wall of Omens and passes. Ryan casts an Eternal Witness, putting Kyrian Ranger into his hand. Then he pitches Kyrian Ranger to Survival, tutoring up Somberwald stack. He then casts it and fights Yisan, returning it to the command zone. He then attacks Jordan with a 4-3 salamander, and Jordan blocks with his own. On end of turn, Jordan casts Council's Judgment. He votes Seaborn Muse, Ryan votes for Animar, Nash votes for Null Rod, and Ron votes for Null Rod. Still on end of turn, Nash casts his Pull from Eternity. On Nash's turn, he casts a Smothering Tide. He then casts a Wheel of Fortune. This causes 21 triggers on Smothering Tide. Ryan pays for all 7 of his triggers, thus getting Nash 14 treasures. He then casts Heuristic Studies, following that up with a long-term planning. He then casts a Reforge the Soul, getting another 21 triggers on his Smothering Tide, this time with no one paying. Nash then tries to play an Underworld Breach, but Ron uses Fierce Guardianship to counter it. Nash then Mirror Maids his Smothering Tide, then casts Time Reversal. Nash then plays a Reflecting Pool as his land for turn, and casts an Arcane Signet, followed up with a Supreme Verdict, and finally, casting his Shabraz and Brawl, Chief of Compliance. On Ron's turn, he draws and does not pay for either of the Smothering Tides. He then passes. On Jordan's turn, he draws, not paying for either of the Smothering Tide, then plays Skyclave Apparition, not paying the Heuristic trigger, causing a Skyshark trigger. The Skyclave Apparition then exiles one of the Smothering Tides. He then casts a Thassa, Deep Dwelling, not paying for the Study, letting Nash draw a card and get another trigger on the Shark. When he tries to change phases, Nash uses Generous Gift on the Skyclave Apparition. Ryan draws for turn and does not pay any of the Tithe triggers. He then taps out to cast Yisan. On Nash's upkeep, he wins his Crypt trigger and does not take 3. He then draws for turn, triggering his Sky Shark. On Nash's main phase, he then casts a Primal Amulet, and follows that up with a brallin, Sky Shark Rider, and a Wheel of Misfortune. Both Ryan and Ron reveal 0 as their number, and Jordan and Nash reveal 15, causing 3 triggers on brallin, and 7 triggers on the Sky Shark, and 7 triggers on the Tithe. He then overloads the Cyclonic Rift, followed by a Dak Faden. He then upticks Dak, causing 2 triggers on the Sky Shark and 2 triggers on brallin. He then casts an Echo of Aeons, flipping his Primal Amulet, causing 7 Sky Shark triggers and 21 Tithe triggers. He then casts a Gamble, copying it with his land. To the first Gamble, he discards a Sulphur Falls. To the second Gamble, he discards a Consecrated Sphinx. He then casts an Underworld Breach, followed by long-term planning. He then casts Consecrated Sphinx from his graveyard, and then flashes back Echo of Aeons. He moves to combat and attacks Ron for lethal, moving to cleanup step and discarding, causing 21 triggers on brallin, killing both Jordan and Ryan.